So thank you, and thank you for the conference organisers for inviting me. And I've given a very broad topic for the presentation today, and then maybe that's appropriate, seeing this is the first presentation of the meeting. I'm a professor at the University of Leeds, but I've been working in medical devices and medical technology for over 40 years now in industry, in the NHS, and also in the universities. So I bring some of that background to look forward to our future challenges. I really have 5 elements to this talk, and I'm just checking my mic is working because I will walk away from the stage. I just want to remind you about where we've all come from. I want to look at the current context of the market and the clinical need. I'm going to give you a little bit about emerging technology, because that's kind of what I do. And I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about the challenges of taking emerging technologies into new products and services, because there are some significant challenges. And then I'm going to use a little bit of the time I've been allotted to talk about something that many of you have not even heard of, and that's called a Science Innovation Audit, which is a piece of work we've been doing for the Government Department of Business around looking at innovation in medical technologies. We've been doing it from a regional perspective in the Leeds City region, but many of the findings are relevant to the whole of the UK. And so just to share a few findings from that piece of work with you, and potentially to get your comments and feedback particularly. And it's the first time we've talked about this to a public audience. So I could talk about 50 years of heritage. Of course, medical technology goes back further, but you can see that one of the most successful medical implants ever developed was in the UK. It was in Yorkshire and Lancashire. It was the Charnley artificial hip joint. But we've got to remember that 50 years ago, that device was targeted at a very specific group of elderly patients who couldn't walk. Okay? And remember also what technology was around in the 1960s. A few of you in the audience will have watched one of these TVs and perhaps driven one of those cars. But technologies advanced substantially in that time. So today, we have much more complex, sophisticated implants for joint replacement, using many different materials and indeed very complex devices. And we also have devices for other joints. We have complex and sophisticated imaging and diagnostics and assessments of those joints when they're implanted in patients. We also recognize that we're now delivering those implants to a much different patient population. Many patients receiving a hip or a knee joint may well be 50 or under, and could well have 50 years of life expectancy and life activity afterwards. But also important, in the same way that hips have developed substantially in that time, the whole technology world has developed in that time. And these small electronic devices here are influencing everything, aren't they? The young people who have hip replacements and now very active are now monitoring how many steps they're doing every day. And all of that technology is flowing into other devices and other products. And of course, an example of today's car is very different from the Austin A35 that I showed you in 1965. So what are the major factors and the major drivers really that are challenging all of us today, us as researchers and innovators, the supply chain and manufacturing industry? Well, I've got 2 slides just to briefly set this context. An aging population that's living longer wants to be more productive and more active. So the targets have changed substantially. Individualized and personalized care. stratified medicine and precision medicine, increased care in the community and at home, more cost-effective treatments, an absolute key, and prevention, and of course better outcomes from that. And just emerging is a substantially increased use of data analytics, informatics, and the integration of that across an accessible single patient care record. So all of these are things that are coming into play and influencing what we're going to create as inventors and innovators and what's going to be manufactured in the future. And we must recognize that that means that our targets, our needs are much more complex. Stratification of the patient population, differentiation, in more complex products and services, more differentiation in global markets, leading to highly differentiated regulation to get to those markets. A real key element of this is, in this more complex environment, is precision. The pharmaceutical industry have articulated this well for the last 5 to 10 years in the context of precision medicine. But what's a key factor for us is how does that work in terms of precision medical technology and medical devices? And not just medical devices to support the pharmaceutical industry in terms of diagnostics, but precision medical technology and medical devices for our industry as well. And behind that, there's also a substantial increase in expectations from the patients and from the healthcare providers. Expectations that come through in terms of changing regulations, in terms of changes to the expectations of reliability. I design and have designed orthopedic implants and artificial heart valves. It is substantially different designing a hip joint to last 10 years than it is designing a hip joint to last 50 years. Or designing a heart valve that's surgically implanted to designing a heart valve that's implanted via a small catheter that goes in through the femoral artery. So the needs are changing dramatically and they're differentiating. And the other thing that's important is this context of convergence of technologies and combination devices. So devices that have additional functionality, materials that have both biological function and possibly digital function. And not just in individual devices, but the integration of technologies along the healthcare platform, along the care path. So integration can be in a single product, but it can also be in a single service. And these are all contexts and challenges for us going forward. And some of this is articulated through, if you like, global policy. You look at the World Economic Forum, what's defined as the fourth industry revolution is saying future technology, future products, our future lives are going to be influenced by advances in physical science, materials and engineering, life sciences, and digital technologies and computing. But perhaps most importantly, they're going to be dramatically influenced by the integration and connection of those technologies into systems and products. These are really important drivers for the future of medical technologies and medical devices. So, just to talk to you a little bit about what types of technologies are emerging. So this is what's sitting now in the research lab that could be driving the products and healthcare services of the future. I can only just touch on a few of these, and I'm just going to talk about some examples that come out of our Centre for Innovative Manufacturing in Medical Devices, which looks at some of the future manufacturing challenges in medical devices. And one of the things we're saying here is that, coming back to this word, precision medical technology is at the heart of everything we will do in the future. And when we're doing research, we're not just doing research about the science at the beginning that's going to produce the new scientific concepts. We have to do research on the technology that goes all the way along the value chain. So yes, defining and doing research on new concepts and clinical need, but in design, on manufacturing processes, on simulation, and in measurement and evaluation. And precision medical technology says you've got to get the precision at every single stage of that pathway. You get no benefit from getting it right in one of those boxes and not integrating it along to the end where you end up with the device interfacing with the patient or the human being. And that's really important. So a few examples, just from a different place on that pathway. So first of all, defining the need more precisely, stratifying it, what patient groups are going to benefit is involved and demanding substantial advances in our diagnostic capability. Now we know that in some areas in terms of how we're using technology in pharmaceuticals, but the advances of how we use imaging, gate laboratory, image analysis to define and characterize the disease state that we're going to treat and to stratify it is going to be a primary driver for the orthopedic industry in the future. The next area is not just defining the need more precisely, but it's then defining how do we design these new complex problems to meet that more precisely defined need. Again, I can describe this rather simply. If you're just going to say, I'm going to replace the whole of the knee joint, that's a traditional knee replacement, of course, you've got to accommodate the different sizes of different patients. But you can do it through one particular design process and manufacture a range of products in different sizes. That's a very simple approach. If you're now saying, actually, I'm going to replace a part of your meniscus, or I'm going to replace a part of your articular cartilage in the knee that's diseased and leave the rest of the organ in place. The rules that you use to design that different type of device, the partial tissue replacement, which is then going to regrow in the body, are extremely more complex. So we've got to not just define the problem, the need more precisely, we've got to develop new design systems using advanced technologies that allow us to design and specify new products that meet that more precisely defined need. And that's before we even get into the aspect of what do we manufacture, how do we manufacture it? We've got to work out what we manufacture in terms of the design solution. If we turn to the manufacturing processes, we're all aware of the impact of 3D printing and additive manufacturing. This is just one example where there is the concept that actually you could take that technology and start to have distributed manufacturing with small manufacturing facilities in the hospital, in the clinic. And this is some work being done by collaborators at Newcastle University on in-clinic distributed manufacturing for the future to try to meet individual patient needs by manufacturing in the clinic. In this case, it's trying to address osteochondral lesion in the hip or knee joint. But there's also that convergence of technologies talking about other types of manufacturing that is new. This is some technology out of the University of Leeds. This is technology where we're producing products and products for patients now commercially using modification of biological tissues, either from animals or from human beings. So transplanting animal tissues that have been modified into human beings as medical devices. So this is breakthrough technology that's realizing benefits in products and patients. But there's many complex manufacturing challenges and commercialization challenges around this type of new technology. But it does open up opportunities to deliver benefits to patients that we've not been able to deliver before. Another approach using manufacturing with biological materials is to take a biological material, collagen, and use traditional manufacturing processes, textile processes, to create scaffolds and implants that will regenerate in the body. That's using non-woven manufacturing techniques. So traditional technology with different biological materials used in a different way to deal with future clinical needs. And then 3D printing, coming back to additive manufacturing, 3D printing of cells. This is really future stuff. This is not available technology for you now. But the imagination is there. Can we 3D print and additive manufacture not just biological materials, but actually cells? And the challenges here are that when we do this, can we do it without disturbing and disrupting the function of the cells? If we can do that and demonstrate it, the golden bit here is to be able to do it with patients' own cells. Then it becomes a medical device instead of a cell therapy. If it becomes a medical device instead of a cell therapy, we all know what that means to translation and commercialization. It means it costs 10 times less or 50 times less to deliver the same patient benefits. But there's some real big challenges there. And how do you deal with that in a regulatory framework? How do you regulate these individual treatments for patients, apart from saying they're just individual treatments? How do you regulate a distributed manufacturing process in a hospital? How do you regulate a design system that says, for that type of patient, I'm going to design the implant in that way? These are all new challenges as we get into this new technology area. And then going forward, these are again emerging technologies, but the concept of using additive manufacturing to add additional functionality onto existing materials. So 3D printing that might give biological functionality onto materials. So here, this is a concept done by colleagues at Leeds again, where we're trying to look at interactions, or they're trying to look at interactions with the nervous system, to try and deliver biological function to interface with nerves. And perhaps something that is actually being realized today in rehabilitation in terms of delivering digital functionality to external prostheses and orthotics. Soft textiles are one approach to this, wearables, but there's many other technologies. And then we can start to use this sort of digital functionality and substantially enhance the type of technology and devices we're delivering in terms of rehabilitation. This immediately starts to give you opportunities around the feedback loop, because you can then start to monitor and evaluate patients you've treated in other ways throughout their life, and that opens up lots of new opportunities. So this combinations of technologies and devices is not just about the new devices themselves, but influencing the whole value chain from design through to evaluation and then through to clinical studies and lifelong monitoring. So there are some challenges with this. I'm just said there are some challenges if we are trying to convert this new technology into new products and services. I've talked about how do we regulate them. Another challenge for us, it's part of our centre work, is how do we evaluate preclinically these new and complex devices. On this slide, we see some machines we've developed over a period of 30 years for testing artificial hip joints and artificial knee joints. That's UK technology that's sold by Simulation Solutions all around the world to test artificial joints preclinically before they go into patients. We develop them with them in our research lab. But if I'm now going to replace, as a medical device, an anterior cruciate ligament, a piece of my meniscus, a piece of bone and cartilage in my hip, how do I test that preclinically as effectively as I have with my artificial hip joint and knee joint. And so we have to develop new methodologies and testing systems to do the preclinical evaluations to allow us to get the new technology into the clinical studies. So one challenge for us going forward. Another challenge for us going forward is if these devices are more complex in delivering different types of function to the patient, how do we evaluate them in the clinical studies? What do the clinical trials look like? What are the patient-related outcome measurements? Do we need new technology to measure and determine new endpoints for clinical evaluation? And the answer to all those questions is yes. Are we doing it? No. So it's not just about new technology, it's about new products, and then how do we build systems around those new products to deliver the outcomes to the patient. And then the final challenge, I've only got 3 of them for you, is how do you deliver this in an integrated way? If you start talking about precision and targeting new definitions of clinical need, and you start talking about precision evaluating on an individual level the patient outcome measures, all the way along that value chain, you've got high levels of precision coming in. And the real wins in this is if you can connect it all together. If you can connect it all together, it really then becomes a very strong value proposition across the whole manufacturing chain, from product concept to patient delivery. But we're not there. And what's going to be really important in this is the use of data, the single patient record, the use of data analytics and informatics, and connecting that all together so that we connect the diagnosis, the patient-specific diagnosis, to the patient-specific outcome measurements with the patient-specific implants. And we can only connect that up and do that with a full connected data system and a continuous care record for individual patients. And there are not many places in the world yet have that continuous care record, not just in place, but operating in the way that it needs to support this type of technology. So we need innovation in the healthcare system, and we need innovation in how we use these different technologies. So if you'll just give me now 5 minutes to finish my talk, and let me share with you some work we've been doing in the last 3 months. Only the last 3 months. This is policy work, and we've been doing a piece of work for the Department of Business called a Science Innovation Audit. A Science Innovation Audit is part of the development of the UK industry strategy, which you can read on the BEIS website. It's the green paper. The industry strategy, this is for the whole of the UK and all of industry, has 10 pillars in it. And these pillars I've identified from the 10 are relevant to medical technology and medical devices in the UK. A Science and Innovation Audit are pieces of work that are being done around the country in different regions for different sectors. It just so happens in the Leeds City region where I live, the local economic partnership have said, we're going to just do one audit and we're going to do it on medical technology. So our findings are relevant to the Leeds City region, but they're also relevant to the UK and Ireland, and they're probably relevant to global industry. I'm going to go through this quite quickly, but a Science Innovation Audit is covered by is guided by 2 principles. If the public sector invests money in science innovation, at some point down the line, there will be returns to the private sector and the UK economy. And I think you can't contest that. How much of a return there is, of course, we can debate. The second thing, which is more contentious, is that individual places in the UK can boost economic growth by focusing the use of their science and innovation more effectively towards particular goals. And that sense of place is more contentious because the whole of the UK science community don't necessarily agree with that. However, what does place mean? That's a question I asked the government department. We've undertaken this, but I asked them that. And I didn't get a clear answer to it. A place is not just about location. It's just not about geography. So I'm going to use the term place to say a place is a connected group of institutions, locations, and industry sectors, or parts of industry sectors, with a common strategic purpose. And the common strategic purpose is really important. And if we could try to define that for medical technology, then we have the opportunity to realistically start to think about how we can help deliver the government policy. The government, the Office of Life Science says it is the government's long-term strategic goal for the UK to be the best place in the world to develop and launch innovative devices and diagnostics. I'm not talking about medicines today. Contributing to economic growth, productivity, reduced healthcare costs, and improved patient outcomes. And I guess if you're a government minister, and I can say this because they're not here today, it's really quite easy to write that down. What is really hard to do is actually deliver it. So some of the science innovation audit is trying to understand how might we get to a place where we can start to deliver that. So I am going to move quickly now. The audit process I've listed down here. It's collected central data on science innovation. It's collected skills data regionally. We've had consultations with industry and national bodies. Particularly, we've got some really valuable external consultancy reports on markets, on regional economies. We've had focus groups online say. We're starting to pull the evidence together, and it's the pulling the evidence together from the different sources is the real value. It's not just one of these things. And we're starting now, and this is part of what we're doing, to say, well, what does this mean? What's it mean? What's the and we're doing consultations. We will produce a report by the end of May, and then that will be published by the government after the election. And alongside that, we're trying to develop a framework of strategic propositions. So we've identified some barriers and gaps. And the question is not just to do the analysis and identify the problem. The real challenging stuff and the real interesting stuff is to work out what is it we're going to do about it. It's the things that we can do. And at the end of these slides, I'm just going to give you some examples of the type of strategic propositions that we might be considering drawing out of this report. So here's some, there's lots, I mean, I always say at this point, how on earth can I make the findings of an audit report interesting? There's just lots and lots of data. And here's just some headlines. What the left-hand boxes talk about generally the medtech industry. And you know, these are open for discussion and dispute. The first thing is it's worth, in the UK, 18 billion GVA. But more importantly, it's going to grow at least 10% a year globally over the next 5 years. And perhaps more interesting, not on the slide, the digital health technology bit is going to grow at over 100%. So that's reinforcing the proposition that converging technologies is going to be increasingly important. So if you and your organizations are not looking at this through a digital lens at the moment, that's telling you that some of the future market opportunities will need you to do that. And of course, it's reinforcing the point that medical technology is important for the health and well-being of the population and the productivity. It's also reinforcing that it's going to be highly multidisciplinary. I've already said that. It's not about a material processing anymore. It's not just about a bit of digital technology. It's not about a bit of biology. The real opportunities are going to be bringing those things together into combination products or bringing them together in integration through a service. There is going to be substantial growth in digital technology and digital health. And there's going to be, the market surveys are saying there's substantial growth in these combination products as well. The slides on the right are characteristics about the Leeds City region. But if you look at them, they're also probably characteristics of the medtech industry in many other regions in the country. So the first thing to say is the Leeds City region, I'm not proud of this, we have 3 million population. Our productivity is lower than the national average. But actually, almost every city in the north of England and maybe the Midlands would say that. I mean, that's kind of the point of this, the starting point. We produce large numbers of graduates in the city region because we're large, so we have an inflow of creating high-level skills, but we're a net exporter of those graduates to the rest of the UK. Because we have a low level of investment in R&D in the city region, we are the most efficient region in the country in producing science outputs. We're not proud of that because we're putting less in, but we are more efficient, 25% more efficient than London and the Golden Triangle. We have a diverse manufacturing base in the city region. If I ask you what is Leeds known for manufacturing, I've told you one product, a hip joint, but nobody would be able to say actually it's a manufacturing for cars or aerospace, because it's hugely diverse. But that's actually potentially a strength in a time when in the future we need diversity of technology and manufacturing to come together. We have shown in the city region 47% growth in digital and tech sectors in the last 5 years against the national average of 35%. That's growth, that's not absolute output. That's the difference between 2016 and 2010. And the other thing we have, again, probably don't know, because one of the things people in Leeds and Yorkshire do is they don't like to talk about themselves. It's a cultural deficit. We have a huge concentration of NHS infrastructure, including digital. We have a concentration, 8% of medtech research. Our average figure for that would be 4. We actually have 18% of the UK medtech patents. These are really surprising. 18% coming from 4% of the 5% of the population. And we actually have 22% of the digital health jobs in the UK in the city region. And some of that is partly because of the NHS infrastructure. That's not all private sector. But these are important platforms of capability to develop medtech in the future. We're moving towards, and not got there, a single patient care record across the whole population. We have it in the million in the Leeds city, but not in the whole region. And another interesting data point, this is growth in exports for medtech, and this is Yorkshire and Humber, not just Leeds City region. We had the highest level of growth over the last 6 years in medtech exports in the UK. So you normalise back to 2010 and then look at the growth, highest growth. And we already have a medtech network. So, but it's, there's lots of barriers, and these are some of the feedback, some of the problems that our consultations have said, why we cannot progress to growth in the future. And I think some of these are about the UK medtech as well. And again, I openly talk about negative things in this presentation, not as a criticism of the status quo, but of recognising that if we're going to grow the medtech industry, we've got to get hold of these and do something about it. So, particularly for this region, we have a very low level of investment in research and development. We have a low proportion of graduate, highest level of skills jobs in the region. That applies to other northern economies. We've had a complete absence of any regionally strategical investment from government into any technology over the last 7 years in the region. So being in a certain place for us has meant nothing in the Leeds City region. And I know the cities in the north could say that as well. These things apply a little bit more to the sector generally. It's clearly very SME-based and necessarily fragmented, and it certainly does have the same strategic voice as other sectors, such as the automotive industry, the aerospace industry. They have industry councils, or even perhaps the pharmaceutical industry. And again, I'd like you to challenge back to me to these points, because this is what people are telling us. Are these right? I'm going to go on. There's not strong clustering activity yet. There's key skill shortages in medtech, particularly in digital health and in regulatory. And that's only going to increase. And then there's a whole range of other things that start to become a little bit more specific. But I really want to come down to the bottom point, because that's contentious. Most of the industry voice has said there's poor access to the NHS and limited ability to evaluate clinical effectiveness and clinical efficacy and effectiveness. That's a single message that's coming. Looked at through many different lenses, but with everything that's going on around this, it doesn't seem as though we're delivering to industry what industry wants. And if you think about my pipeline of, if you like, manufacturing from product concept to delivering to patients, it's no good pouring water in at the top of the stream if there's a constraint before we get to the patient and get to the market. So no amount of investment in basic research of materials is going to get you more products to market if you've got a constraint that's limited it in terms of the ability to evaluate the new products and technologies. And that's a strong message that's coming through. So this is what we're trying to do in the audit. I won't dwell too long on this slide. This is about saying we're trying to define a strategic common purpose of how different stakeholders can come together. Okay, and this is some definition of that strategic common purpose. Starts off with supporting companies who export to grow exports, supporting companies who don't export to become exporters. I mean, being here, it's clear we need to have something in there about the supply chain, because it's not in there yet. There's something about preclinical and clinical evaluation of medtech products that is a huge underpinning need here. And then adoption into the NHS. And we can relate all of that back to the industry strategy. So we can use the language that BEIS is giving us to redefine to them what we need. And then what we're doing now is simply bringing forward some propositions that we will then be able to develop into business development proposals or investment proposals. And I'm not going to go through these 10. Some of them relate a little bit to the Leeds City region, but an integrated medtech innovation hub, which goes both across the value chain and across the geography of the UK. For us, there's issues about grow on and scale up. We're creating a lot of young companies, but we're not necessarily enabling to grow. I'm not supporting that. We've got, I think, national issues around skills, and I've talked about that, and so there's some propositions to develop there. There's a proposition that's beginning to emerge about a national clinical evaluation initiative or centre. Some people don't like the word centre, but there's something needs to be done around the ability for UK industry to have its emerging technology evaluated, particularly in early stages. And so I'll go on. And so that's kind of where we're going with this, what we might put in as some recommendations for the report. So my very last slide tries to wrap all of this up. In the big picture, we can analyse the global markets and the growth and the differentiation of what markets will grow in the future. I've given you some examples of very diverse disciplines and technologies that need to come together. But by doing the audit work, we've really identified, I believe, some specific gaps and bottlenecks that unless we address those, we won't get to the end products of successful companies and the sales of exports in medtech unless we address some of these points that are constraining us at the moment. So thank you.